I should begin by saying that I'm a teacher and a musician and not primarily a game designer. And so I'm here especially to share about teaching and to learn about design. Teaching history typically entails developing narratives which link individuals. I'm just going to share my screen here, sorry. Which link individuals, context, causes, and effects in order to enrich learners' comprehension. Musicologists Creed is the umbrella term for an ongoing project at Texas Tech University School of Music, which exploits the intersections of digital technology, narrative contingency, and the playful pleasures of immersive gaming contexts. Hashtag MCreed resists presumptions regarding chains of sequential historical moments, that is, models of great battles or great works, or even worse, great men. And instead, it prioritizes a more reflective and contingent understanding of historical experience as studies move through webs of intersectional events. In practice, we borrow from the historical role-playing models of packages like Reacting to the Past and Minds on Fire, How Role-Playing Games Transform College, but we add a parallel stream. That parallel stream is the stream of interactive fiction. Recognizing that a significant percentage of games' appeal can derive from their narrative contexts and focusing upon certain watersheds in music history, combining live research and roleplay, and developing the narrative imagination and transmedia skills required to employ interactive fiction tools, MCreed models historical contingency. We seek to empower student authors to imagine multiple alternative outcomes to events and interactions and to play out the implications of these contingent alternatives. By engaging actively via role-playing and interactive fiction games, we can build bridges to students' comprehension of history's qualities as contingent, challenging, and fun. So this is a paper about teaching critical thinking skills in the university classroom, but in a fashion that liberates us through various kinds of gameplay from the chain of successive inevitabilities, which sometimes results when undergraduates' prior learning experiences meet the idea of historical narratives. And as I said, I should begin with two modest disclaimers. I am neither a games author, except by necessity, nor much of a games player, but rather simply a teacher who's interested in using gaming energy and engagement in a teaching and learning situation. I'm also very cognizant that I'm speaking to an audience of expert game theorists and designers. And so what I have to contribute here is not so much insights about gaming as insights about pedagogy, and perhaps about the applicability of interactive fiction design to the pedagogy of history. In the study of both the physical world and arts and humanities, of communication and cognition, a wide disparity of technical tools and perspectives are required of area specialists. But what connects scholarship and teaching across these disparate disciplines is critical thinking, the ability to look at physical, perceptual, or semiotic data, for example, and discern underlying factors shaping that data's organization. As writers and researchers and teachers, we engage these skills in our own scholarship. We model, describe, and coach the same techniques with our own students. Teaching history, in particular, typically implicates the exploration of narratives which link individuals, contexts, causes, and effects in order to help students understand why events unfolded as they did, and that brings me to games. Teaching history as contingent means finding ways to problematize canons of objects, of composers, of commentaries, timelines, and expository narratives. Undergraduates in my teaching experience tend to oversimplify history as a chain of sequential successive events, great works, great men, each seemingly arising inevitably and unavoidably from its predecessors. It requires more imagination and flexibility, and perhaps some new ways of thinking about assessment for me to help students engage with the reality that the actual historical results are a product of complex interactions of individuals, motives, intentions, communications, and miscommunications. At the same time, I'm also interested in flipping other elements of classroom delivery, for example, the use of technology and social media, changing the dynamics of back and forth communication, and facilitating a freer flow of information between and among all the participants in a classroom. And developing this mode of instruction has required a lot of trial and error. MCreed teaching borrows the historical role-playing models of Reacting to the Past from Barnard College and Minds on Fire, How Role-Playing Games Transform College. But it also incorporates additional resources and critical thinking skills, which I have particularly encountered within the gaming and interactive fiction communities. As I say, I'm not a gamer or an author of interactive fiction, But I do remember, because I'm of the age to remember, the engagement elicited by Choose Your Own Adventure and finding those formats in primary school book clubs. The contemporary gaming community encompasses quite wide and diverse demographic categories, including a wide variety of my students, for whom a significant percentage of gameplay's appeal can derive from its immersive historical contexts. Games like Assassin's Creed Discovery even deactivate the run and fight model to permit players' exploration of a rich virtual world. And so, focusing upon certain watershed moments in modern music history, combining live research and roleplay analogous to that of hardcore reenactors, and developing the narrative imagination and transmedia skills required to employ digital interactive fiction tools, Creed centralizes the questions arising from engaging with historical contingency. Creed empowers student authors to imagine multiple alternative outcomes to historical events and interactions, and to play out the implications of those contingent alternatives. Engaging actively via role-playing and interactive fiction games can be a bridge to students' comprehension of history's qualities as contingent, enlightening, and fun. When I began second-year level music history teaching for university music majors, the standard metric for demonstrating critical thinking skills was the multi-stage and multiply reviewed research paper. This is, of course, a tried and true mode of teaching, and it still has powerful merits, particularly in light of the steady erosion of the capacity for expository prose and the challenges of teaching humanities-based critical thinking skills. Though those same skills are widely required, and I have both anecdotal and quantitative evidence to support this, those critical thinking skills are widely required in a wide range of entry-level professional careers. On the other hand, after 20 years of reading 100 undergraduate research papers per semester in an annual course, I was beginning to lose my mind. I knew that I wished to make some changes. When I began to see my own locutions, like this sample, solid though I felt my locutions were, originating in models and templates I'd authored years before, when I began to see these locutions coming back to me in students' papers from other classes, I knew the time was come for a change. For reasons of both mundane expediency, oh my God, another 100 multiple review stage research projects to grade, also philosophical restlessness and psychological weariness, I determined to try to find additional and or alternative methods for testing and modeling critical thinking. Overwhelmingly, I was driven by and drawn by what I saw in the granular pleasures of doing history available to gamers. Of course, we recognize that in the 21st century, there are many sorts of literacies. This is reflected in the shift from writing-intensive to communications-intensive assessments. But what is or should be defined as communications? I can say with the impunity of a grizzled veteran that a very practical motive behind my shift in assessment methods was precisely the staff hours impossibility of sustaining multi-stage writing assessment in large enrollment classrooms. But could it be possible to turn this challenge into an opportunity? So I began to ask myself how students actually need to employ history in the 21st century. It seems to me that one central consideration has to be that we need our students to be able to make sense of and use history in a rapidly changing world, in which fictions are presented as facts and in which historical contingencies are treated as historical inevitabilities. We need our students to be able to assess and compare critical perspectives within cultural contexts. Where do our students encounter contingency, and in what ways in those situations does it connect to the interpretation of historical narratives? How can we enhance their capacity for critical thinking by teaching these contingent narratives? Gaming is one common space for teaching and experiencing contingency. What if I do this? What if I do that? For that matter, so is the internet itself. So how does contingency play to my students' strengths? It plays to my students' capacity, very much a 21st century set of skills, to problem solve, to learn collaboratively, to seek alternate paths to solutions, to synthesize demonstrated and imitated and empirical knowledge. And it speaks to their millennial sense of the world as an uncertain, unpredictable, and fragile place. My teaching of Creed really took off with the incorporation in the 2017 iteration of Twine's interactive fiction authoring capacities. Twine emphasizes a tangible and concrete project, one that obtains past the one-off event of an exam, and it permits archiving and expansion. The way that I teach these critical perspectives within cultural contexts is to teach moments across diverse historical, cultural, and experiential contexts, out of which have emerged particular artistic and critical creations. By contextualizing such creative expressions, modeling the factors and perceptions that shape them, a Wagner opera, a Stravinsky ballet, and very importantly, exploring historical alternatives, I can model and evoke contingent thinking, that is, the recognition of contrasting possibilities within historical and cultural context. Creed explores and collides the casts of characters and cultural aesthetics, that is, isms, aesthetics that have shaped watershed cultural and historical and artistic events. Impressionism, modernism, romanticism, socialism, neo-romanticism, expressionism, and so forth. And also the alternate scenarios through which, for example, Wagner's Parsifal, Ives' Second Symphony, or Stravinsky's Le Sacre du Printemps might never have been created or might have been created very differently. We model both the content of the music which emerges from these moments and the context of the moments that shape the musical decisions that were made. So I'm exploring ludography, the idea that contingency-driven role-playing investigation, that is historical gaming, can enhance student engagement, pattern recognition, critical thinking, and command of intellectual practice. It can do it in both relatively archaic and mundane contexts, and also in quite contemporary contexts, as with the U.S. War College. In our music history teaching, we've come to the conclusion that we would sacrifice data in favor of more attention to modeling and practicing processes of analysis, of critical thinking, reading, and communication. This was exemplified in the shift within my own state's standards from undergraduate degree requirements of writing proficiency to communications proficiency. This shift in turn permitted us to think about the many types of literacy and the many narrative media available to a 21st century student. It was also consistent with our long-term philosophical and pedagogical goal of being willing to engage the forms, media, processes, and games of the target clientele, and of the necessity of balancing students' need to learn new skills with a willingness to meet them where they are. In all these circumstances, regardless of the media, whether analog or digital, humanities and fine arts teaching of critical thinking involves the modeling of investigative processes, how to look at data, discern patterns within that data, identify a particular moment of unexplained anomaly within those patterns, and to formulate hypotheses which might explain the anomalies. That kind of analysis of patterns and their anomalies can be applied to a music score, to a composer's overall creative output, to the consistency of a variety of techniques employed in media, to the philosophy as expressed versus the actions taken by historical actors. Musicologists Creed asks students to imagine their way into the experience of historical individuals as they move through historical moments, responding to the contingencies of those moments. It in turn asks students to develop ways of conveying that experience of historical contingency to an audience of their peers, their teachers, or their own future students. During and following the pandemic lockdown, the interactive elements have proven to be surprisingly important to my target clienteles. When provided the opportunity to participate in the Wednesday 7 a.m. special sessions via video conferencing instead of in person, my students' unanimous consensus in the spring of 2022 was that they preferred the face-to-face 7 a.m. meetings. That in turn meant it was important to take unique advantage of the face-to-face context, even in the midst of COVID sanitary protocols. And so right now, what I'd like to do is to share some material from the media streams, and I'd also like to just provide a very brief glance at the Twine workspace. And I want to emphasize again that part of the process which is involved with these students is not only the inculcation of historical and critical thinking skills, but in asking them to engage in role-playing game and in game design using Twine, I'm asking them to take on an entirely new set of skills. So you should see on your screen now a Twine workspace. I will apologize for the very tangled nature of the coding. This is the product of a very large group of students engaged as a team, each one of those teams putting together and assembling their own components to the game. This is the game itself in the Spring 22 iteration. The watershed historical event is the premiere of Charles Ives' Second Symphony, which he composed, as we'll see here, in 1907, between 1907 and 1909 in Danbury, Connecticut. but which was premiered many years later by Leonard Bernstein and the New York Philharmonic in 1952. And so as part of the game design, the students familiarized themselves with particular individuals who were involved. In addition to addressing the historical individuals, the dramatis personae, the real people, they also invent characters. And then they develop information and fictional biographies that situate those characters in a position to be able to observe the events around either the composition of the work or the premiere of the work. There is a series of relevant historical events, the end of the US incursion into Cuba, the publication of Orwell's 1984, the onset of the Korean War, which we believe might be relevant to the nature of the composition and to its premiere. And then a series of meetings between these characters. And this is where we begin to take advantage in the third module of the course of the semester. We begin to take advantage of the students' own capacity for using twine to create particular games. So these are two characters, Grace Robinson and Mary Sullivan. The student hypothesized, you can see when she was born, how she was hired by Ives's father to play in Ives's band, her attendance at the premiere at the CBS radio studios, her interaction with her friend Mary as they are packing to send Grace off to Yale, a meeting on the Queensboro Bridge in 1909, and so forth. I want to emphasize that this is not a course in game design. It is a course which uses game design with the goal of teaching contingency and encouraging students to imagine alternate scenarios. We're modeling contingent thinking. We are modeling moments in which individuals make choices and in which, if those choices had been different, things might have gone very differently, as in the four-way intersection at the very end of the Castaway film, as in the two roads diverging in a wood and I taking the lesser one, that has made all the difference. What is contingency and how might the events have, and how might historical events have wound up differently? This is from a mock documentary called Confederate States of America and the story of Ives' Second Symphony. And again, I want to emphasize that the goal here is to model historical and contingent thinking and to provide students the opportunity to engage with contingency in a more active fashion, which better equips them to use critical thinking skills. Sorry, I'm just having a bit of an interruption here, but I think I'm all right again. So ordinarily in a paper from my home audiences of teachers and historians, as I conclude here, this might be the point at which I would talk about the takeaway goals as they were expressed in my opening. I'm seeking to expand and energize student engagement. I am seeking to create a kind of lateral energy between and among students and student teams to correlate with that between the teacher and the student, to perceive webs of dynamic relationships, to resist the idea of canons of great works, to enhance students' capacity to take ownership of their own learning and to make of it what they will, to model investigative processes, to help them apply that experience to wider critical and creative engagement tasks across their entire university experience, to imagine the experience of individuals at historical moments and how those individuals might have made different choices in the game of contingent thinking, which might have led to very different historical narratives. Because I have the good fortune to be speaking to an audience of game design experts, I can share with you some of the rewards and also some of the ongoing challenges which Musicologists Creed faces. The goal of this pedagogy is the capacity to see doing history as an act of imagination rather than of memorization. As I've discussed, Twine interactive fiction authoring significantly facilitates this. There are certain challenges, and I'm sure there are other gaming platforms which are capable of more elaborate and sophisticated narrative design. Twine's attraction is, first off, its modest price point, and secondly, the clarity and simplicity of its authoring language. In our first module, they learn the basics of Twine authoring. In the second module, they begin to develop branching narratives, true branching narratives within their partnerships or across teams. And then finally, in Module 3, the group as a whole merges both skills and authored material into one master game. And that, in fact, is a point at which the limitations of Twine, which I love, form a great challenge. Because there's no way that I am aware of to group author a live Twine document online, say in the fashion of Google Docs or other group authoring tools, it's necessary that each participant or team send their passages as raw code to me as the designer. It's then up to me to meld all of these into the master game. This is time-consuming and vulnerable to errors or programming mistakes. If there were an interactive fiction authoring platform which matched Twine's affordability and accessibility, but which permitted online, live, updated group editing, that would streamline the job of collating the master game. So perhaps that could be part of our conversation during the Q&A. These are moments of staging in various iterations and a level of engagement considerably greater and a capacity to work with history which is considerably more powerful. Thank you very much.